I told Isaac if he ran out of preachers, I could do something. But you've probably heard more than you need to hear from me lately. But I was interested in Dave's little story about his time with his father. I had some good times with my father. And if you go to our website and look under the Doctrine articles, there's an article there on the flight of the Falcon. Great story. To make that short, I learned to drive in a 1948 Dodge Power Wagon, which would absolutely go anywhere, and if it didn't, it had a winch on the front, and then you could go anywhere. But it only went about 8 miles an hour. And so I learned to drive on that and a Model A Ford. Yeah, I know what that is. That's how old I am. You don't get this white hair for nothing, you know. And so one day, when I was about 13, 14, Dad decided it was time for me to graduate to learn how to drive the family car, which was a Ford Falcon. 1963, little Ford Falcon. Some of you may remember what they looked like. You know, little 6-cylinder engine in it. So we turned off from the main highway, 182, onto the Spragues Falls Road, and Dad pulls over and says, "Well, you want to drive?" Absolutely, I want to drive. And so we switched places. I got in the car. It was standard shift. Everything was standard shift back then. Put it in first, second, and third. Boy, it was, I mean, compared to what I'd been driving, this was a speedster. You didn't really know how fast you were going, you were zipping right along. So a mile and a half up the road, our house is right there. And for those who have been there, the house is on the left, and there's a right angle. You come up the hill, and the driveway is a right angle, and there's about room for one car, and there's the shop door. Right there. So you come up and go. Well, I was used to if the Power Wagon, if you just take your foot off the accelerator, it stops. You know, it slows down and stops. Well, the Falcon didn't do that. But I was zipping on. I thought I was doing pretty good. And I was coming up, and Dad kind of looks over. And where's it coming up the hill? And so we get up the hill, and he kind of thought, I guess, that I was going to go by and stop and back in. No, my plan was just to go right up and turn into the driveway and stop. Well, I turned, but I didn't get all the way around because I was going too fast. And so we headed out into the field in the air. And there was a big rock there, and we cleared the rock. Got on the other side of the rock and landed like that. And my dad was much more mild-mannered than Dave's dad. And Dad, I remember we came to a landing. This is Dad. Where are you going? That's all he said.
That's where we get it.
That's right. That's where we get it. That's where we get it. Pretty calm, cool, collected. You didn't want to see him get upset. He was the strongest guy I ever knew personally. And my uncle, who was 6'5", and went about 260, would tell of the physical exploits of my father, who was 5'9". And he used to run out of the high school and jump up onto the flagpole thing and do about 10 one-hand pull-ups when he was in high school. He had some good times in the Army making his sergeants upset. Anyway, all of that to say, we all have dads. Hebrews chapter 13, and just one verse, and I'm just going to give a perspective here. Hebrews chapter number 13. Verse number 5 says, "Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee." Look at going ahead into a new year. And I've done this now for about 34 years here, but looking ahead into a new year, good perspective. The promise is the reason for the performance. Write that down, put it on your refrigerator. The promise is the reason for the performance. Paul says, and I agree with Brother Harbin, Paul wrote the book of Hebrews. Let your conversation be without covetousness and be content with such things as you have. And we always preach that. That's what we preach. And we preach rules and we preach do's and don'ts and we preach all of that stuff and everybody gets all upset. But the reason for that, the promise, is the reason for that. Amen. It's not just about rules. It's not just about living right. It's not just about making people upset. It's not the do's and don'ts. It's not the punishment. If you do this, God's going to get you. Well, he is, but that's not the issue. We all are going to stand before the Lord and we're all going to give an account. But through all of that, and all of that account, and we have an account with him right now, because it says Jesus Christ with whom we have to do. That to do means we have an account. So it's not the punishment. It's not the what ifs. What if you did this? What if I could get away with that? What if I could do something else? It's not the, well, you wish you had. Because we all have those, right? We talk to our kids that way. I can't make you stop, but I can make you wish you had. And that's how we get by a lot of times. And unfortunately, sometimes that becomes our perspective. And so our motivation is the rules. And our motivation is, I don't want to do that because I will get punished. And our motivation is well, I don't want to be bad. And the motivation is, well, I want everybody to think well of me and all of that. And we motivate ourselves in the wrong ways. Because the promise is the reason for the performance. And the promise is that I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. That's the promise. So why should we love Christ? Because he will never leave us or forsake us. Amen. Why should we obey? Is because he will never leave us or forsake us. Why should we want to be as close as possible? Is because he will never leave us or forsake us. So our motivation for serving the Lord should perhaps be less punishment and more security. Less disagreement and more love. More serving out of a heart that says, I know you will never leave me or forsake me. Amen. Because that's what he said. So we move, perhaps in the new year we could change our paradigm a little bit. We can just move from punishment to promise. Because moving from punishment to promise will improve your obedience. It will improve your obedience. If you obey your father because you love your father, you will obey him better than just because you fear him. Amen. Although I must admit, fear is a motivator. But if you obey him because you love him, you will want to be close to him. You will want to hear that you are doing a good job. You will want to be what he wants you to be. Not just because he's going to be upset if you're not, but because he's the one that will never leave you or forsake you. Amen? Amen. Amen.
What's funny is every time my dad tells that story, or I've read that article quite a few times in the course of my life, and I can picture him sitting there and me driving, and I think it would have been the exact same story because I could just picture him. I never knew my dad's father, for those of you who don't know. I never knew him real well. He passed away when I was very young. So anyways, I could picture my dad. Every time I hear that story, I picture my dad turning and saying, Where are you going? For a drive. This way. I don't know what you say to that, but anyway, kind of funny. Joshua had a story kind of like that, pulling out across the highway, driving the wrong direction. Dad had a chance to relive the version of the story with his own son.
Right in Kingfisher on Main Street.
Yeah, right on Main Street. Pulled out of the gas station, across the highway, and headed down the highway the other way. And Dad looked over and said, "Where are you going?" Or something. I don't know.
He said, "What are you doing?"
Yeah. What are you doing? Anyway, good times. It's a night for sharing stories.